Well, good day, everybody, and welcome to the Neuroscience edition of 5-Minute Psych. In this 5-minute segment, we'll look at the organization of the brain, and in doing so, we'll see that it has three main regions: the hindbrain, midbrain, and forebrain. Then we'll look at each region in more detail, focusing on the functions of each area. The brain can be divided up into three major regions, with each region corresponding to where it's located relative to the spinal cord. The first area above the spinal cord is the hindbrain, which is the first to develop, and this is good because it's important for survival functions. Next is the midbrain, which can be thought of as the go-between for sensation and action. And then the largest region and last to develop is the forebrain, which is involved in memory, thought, and emotion. The hindbrain has three subregions: the medulla, pons, and cerebellum. The medulla is the first area above the spinal cord, and it controls things like breathing, circulation, and reflexes. If your medulla was damaged, you couldn't breathe on your own. Above the medulla is the pons, which plays a role not only in sleep and wakefulness, but it also coordinates many of our automatic movements, like swallowing, facial expressions, and posture. Finally, the cerebellum is located at the very back of the brain, and it looks like a mini brain all on its own. We know it's involved in balance and coordinating movements because damage here results in jerky movements and uncoordination, as well as difficulty controlling emotions and attention. The midbrain is a small area that contains the reticular formation, which is a network of neurons that runs up through the center of the hindbrain and midbrain and ends up in the thalamus of the forebrain. The reticular formation filters incoming sensory information and is also important in sleep and arousal. The substantia nigra receives input from sensory and motor areas and then sends this information on to brain regions in the forebrain that make decisions about what actions to do next. Finally, the superior and inferior colliculi are involved in orienting visual and auditory attention, respectively. The forebrain is the largest region and includes everything above the midbrain, including the thalamus, hypothalamus, amygdala, hippocampus, basal ganglia, cerebrum, and the cerebral cortex. The thalamus looks like a big bulb on top of the midbrain and is likely the true center of our brain. It wouldn't be wrong to think of it as a sensory switchboard, since all of our incoming sensory information, except for smell, is routed through the thalamus for some initial processing and sorting before going on to specific sensory areas of the cortex. The hypothalamus is so named only because it lies under the thalamus. It's primarily involved in motivated behavior, like regulating our body temperature so we don't get too hot or cold. It also regulates our food and water intake, as well as our sex drive. But it also contains reward centers that, if a rat could press a pedal to electrically stimulate those reward centers, it would do so up to 7,000 times per hour to the point of death. So yeah, very involved in motivated behavior. But it also directs the pituitary gland, located right underneath, and this little gland is the master gland of the endocrine system, or our whole hormonal system. The amygdala helps us process emotions, especially fear and aggression. It's also right next to the memory-forming structure, the hippocampus, and anything emotional is tagged as extra important for the hippocampus to process and store. The basal ganglia plays a role in coordinating voluntary movements, and it shows an increase in activity with rewarding stimuli, such as tasting chocolate or winning a free lottery ticket. Wrapped around all of these forebrain structures is the cerebrum, the largest part of the brain that's responsible for higher-level mental activities like learning, remembering, and thinking. The thin 3-millimeter diameter outermost layer of the cerebrum is called the cerebral cortex, made up of layers of neurons. It's made up of 4 lobes in each hemisphere and process much of our higher level mental activities. Well, we just looked at the 3 main regions of the brain and discussed the functions of specific areas within each of these regions. Now, aren't you glad you had 5 minutes?